with at least a little bit of good news. As I mentioned, there was no paid director for the EOC. They had secretarial support, but no professional staff. Remember, the EOC is created in December 1963. We're into 1968 without paid professional staff. You can't run a meaningful committee with only volunteers in charge. I've been on a lot of boards of directors. I'm sure you've been on a lot of boards of directors. But at some point, you need paid professional staff to generate an agenda, to do the work of the committee that needs to be done. The Equal Opportunities Commission has now gone into its 5th year with Jim Wright as the volunteer chairman. So the year starts with some good news. They propose it, the advisory committee recommends it, and then it gets right up to the city council and it gets stalled. March 1968, it gets stalled, and then 10 days, 12, 14 days later, it's approved almost unanimously, 19-2. Now, what could have happened between March 29th and April 12th to generate such support for paid directorship? That would be it. That would be it. Dr. King is assassinated. And the assassination of Dr. King on April 4th is it's a turning point everywhere. It's a turning point for the country, but it's also a turning point for Madison and the University of Wisconsin. Racial relations are, what's the word I'm looking for here? Things get tougher afterwards. I mean, what happened around the country happened here too. There's a rise of the Black Power movement. There's increasing alienation. There's about the only good thing you can say is that it made the council vote for a paid executive director. As Mayor Fesky tells the council, a paid executive director is a matter of the highest priority, as the events of the past week have lent a special sense of urgency. So Fesky was specifically citing Dr. King's assassination as part of the politics in getting that paid director. The only alderman to speak against a paid executive director is a member of the EOC. That would be our friend Alderman Crary, the Dane County Deputy Sheriff. I don't think we have a serious racial problem in Madison, but within 5 years with a director, we will have one. Crary's term expires on the EOC. Mayor Fesky does not reappoint him. Now, there are 2 memorials for Dr. King. The first one is on campus, and Chancellor William Sewell wants the students to speak as part of the university, the official university program. And the students, as Matt LePay would say, the students are having none of it. The students say, no, we are in charge. We are leading this service. You got nothing to do with it. And it is what you see on the left is the student-run memorial service for Dr. King. It is predictably bitter and angry, as you'd expect. And then that march, 15,000 people in the street. More people in the street than at any time other than to celebrate the end of the war or a Big Ten championship. So this is the campus service. The official community service is on Sunday. It is a dark and windy day, and predictably, there's a service at the Capitol, and then there's a march down State Street and out to the Congregational Church, and predictably, the march is led by 4 white men. Reverend Alfred Swan, Professor Maurice Zeitlin, businessman Jack von Metterheim, and Father Joseph Hammer lead the march. Governor and Mrs. Knowles come to the service. Mayor and Mrs. Fesky come to the service. Reverend Wright speaks. Reverend Swan recites Lincoln's 2nd inaugural. Rabbi Swarzensky reads from Scripture. And the Reverend Borgort reads from the letter from Birmingham jail. Reverend Richard Pritchard, as we've established, the only cleric to actually spend time in the South for civil rights, is not invited to participate in the program. I have no idea. the champ comes to town in late April 1968 as part of the International Day against War, Racism, and the Draft. But the champ doesn't want to talk about the war, he doesn't want to talk about the draft, he only is going to talk about racism and the black Muslim approach to racism, which is essentially black separatism. You know, when Ali is in the early parts, he's talking about, we don't want no pie in the sky, we want something sound on the ground while we're still around. And people are into it, but then he starts talking about, he calls integration hypocritical. He says that interracial marriages should be prohibited. This is Ali talking an absolute straight black Muslim, black separatist line, and people start booing him. And there's an undercover cop at the rally, because undercover cops were at all the rallies, and he has a very low opinion of Ali's speech. He calls it repetitious and not particularly revealing. Many times Ali was hissed by the audience, and in fielding questions, he often showed a very infantile mentality. This is who we've got as our Madison undercover cops, calling the greatest of all time infantile. A couple of weeks later, as expected, James Wright is named the executive director of the EOC. Comes back from theological seminary, and he is not on the job very long before he has an absolute full-blown crisis. The incident at Breese-Stevens Field. How many people were here in the summer of 1968? A couple. Do you remember? Do you know what okay, this is, well, you were young. You were young. They used to have teen dances in the summer, mainly at the East Side Businessmen's Club. And in the summer of 1968, there are so many fights between whites and blacks that the police chief, Monona, shuts them down. In April, some black kids beat up a white kid near Old Brick Park. In response, 30 white kids chase 3 black kids down the street. They corner one on John Street. 30 against 1. They start kicking, hitting, threatening to kill him. A cop muscles his way through. A cop named Gerald Thorstensen pushes his way through to save the black kid, and now the white kids start kicking and hitting the cop as well. This is the level of race relations in Madison in 1968. White kids are kicking a white cop because the cop is trying to save a black kid from getting beaten up by the white kids. That is the backdrop against which this incident happens at Breese-Stevens Field. Now, there are about 400 kids at the dance, 85% white, which means 50 to 75 black kids, the rest white kids. And most everybody comes to dance and have a good time. But there are some people there who come to cause trouble, and they do, and some of them have been drinking. And by 10:30, there are fights breaking out all around. Now, there are some white-on-white fights and some black-on-black fights, and some white kids get upset because a white girl dances with a black boy, and there are all these, and some of the fights are because of bad blood between black kids at Central and white kids at La Follette. But there are all these fights going on, and there are 5 undercover cops for 400 kids. Bad odds. And they don't make any arrests, and about 11 o'clock, the kids start turning on the cops. And so the cops shut the dance down, and everyone starts to leave. And then people are crossing Patterson Street, and all of a sudden, a car with 4 white kids in it, with its lights off, lurches through the crowd, and just like jumps to the crowd, comes upon some kids in the crosswalk, jams on the brakes, but hits this black kid, breaks his leg. Now we have a serious problem. Because now a couple of black kids see a friend of theirs lying on the ground with a broken leg. They descend on the car. They start beating up the car. They're busting the windows, they're denting the hoods. Now it turns out that one of the white kids inside the car is the son of Deputy Sheriff and Alderman Crary. The kids in this car had already been fighting with black kids before this. So now we've got more chaos. The cops break that up. They send Crary and his people on the way. They take Willie James with his broken leg to the hospital, and now they try and disperse. So most of the white kids sort of go off towards the east side, but the black kids have to walk up East Washington Avenue to get the bus to go back down to the south side. And cops start following them, and there are 4 cops that are walking along with these groups of black kids. And there are 4 squad cars that are driving up East Washington Avenue at walking speed along with the black kids. So we got cops, okay. So one of the kids breaks a window, and one of the kids curses. They arrest the kid for cursing. Now some of the other kids and an adult try and stop the police from arresting the kid who got arrested for cursing. Now they arrest them. So now they've arrested a black adult and 4 black juveniles and no whites. So now the black kids, the rest of the black kids who aren't arrested, they get to the bus, they go down, they get back to the south side. Now this caravan of cars of white kids descends on the south side, yelling racial epithets and driving through the streets of South Madison, driving on lawns, yelling racial epithets. It was around midnight on Saturday night. This is not looking well. Black kids put up barricades. And now the white kids have to bust through the barricades with their beater cars in order to get out of the neighborhood and get back home to the east side. This is on Saturday. And now the word has gone out that blacks, at the dance, white kids were using racial epithets, black kids were using racial epithets, cops were using racial epithets. Everyone was using racial epithets. So now it's midnight on Saturday night, it's early Sunday morning. The word goes out that there was this fight at the dance, and the cops only arrested black kids. And the cops protected the white kids, and the cops were using racial epithets. So now South Madison is about to blow. Reverend Wright decides the only way to preserve the peace is to have this extraordinary public hearing on a Sunday afternoon at the city council chambers to let people essentially vent. And they vent and they make all sorts of comments about the police. And Reverend Wright seems to endorse the concept that there had been that the cops had been racist. He said, there certainly does appear to be a double standard. So now we've got Reverend Wright essentially attacking the police. The Equal Opportunities Commission thinks Wright has done a great job. He's preserved the peace. He's kept a lid on things. The political and the legal establishment, though, are not happy at Reverend Wright saying there's a double standard. Herman Thomas says that racial tension is caused, quote, by agitators from the outside. The president of the Police and Fire Commission is a Republican attorney named Stuart Becker. He had been the chairman of the Republican Party of Dane County. He tells Wright to cease and desist from further ventilating your complaints through the news media, which can only lead to heated racial tensions. So now everybody's beating up on Reverend Wright. A group of probably the most prominent black citizens in Madison. If you're trying to follow along with the booklet, you'll note that there have been some changes. I apologize for that. I had to get it in last week. I'd be happy to send anybody who wants it the final copy, because there are a lot of slides that are not in the copy you have, and some slides have been readjusted. So I've got everyone's email, so if you want, I'd be happy to send you the full slides. So, but this is a letter that a group of very prominent blacks in Madison send to the EOC. In the execution of racial justice, Madison is in many instances as negligent as those notorious southern cities which have made a tradition of ignoring the rights and needs of the black citizen. And this next sentence may have some current resonance. This thinly disguised contempt for the comparative value of a black life has made a mockery of the phrase equal protection under the law. So I would say this is an early formulation of Black Lives Matter. And they note that Madison still has no non-white attorneys. The police, of course, angrily deny claims of racial prejudice, and they note the bravery of Officer Thorstensen putting himself at risk to save the black kid a couple of months ago. Mayor Fesky admits things are very bad, that there is an absolute lack of communication between the minority community and the police. Some of this may starting to be sounding familiar. That's one of the things when you look at historical trends, you see this thing that we're discussing in 2019, we were discussing in 1968. We were probably discussing it before that, but I mean, the same headlines. Yeah?
What was the name of the black guy that got hit?
Willie James.
Willie
James, 1735 Baird Street.
Does he still live there?
I don't know. We can check.
No.
No. Okay. How did you know that?
Because everyone's moved.
Okay. Capital Times chimes in on the fact that we've always known that there was racial bigotry in the police department. Because remember, I think I mentioned this, in the 1920s, you pretty much had to join the Ku Klux Klan to get a job as a patrolman with the Madison Police Department. So there is a great tradition of racial bigotry in the Madison Police Department. Obviously, not all cops are racist, but from the 20s to the 60s, a Madison police officer in 1966, 67 could very easily have been working alongside a cop who was in the Ku Klux Klan when he joined the Madison Police Department in the 1920s. And I'm convinced that that's one of the reasons why the Madison cops in the 60s were the way the Madison cops were. A, they're all East Siders with a pretty simmering resentment against the effete college snobs who were throwing away their education to piss on the president. But I also believe that there were cops who worked alongside cops who 40 years before had been in the Klan. And that has to have an impact. That has to rub off on you.
When did the town of Madison start having a police?
I don't know.
Because they didn't have any black cops until the 90s.
Yeah. I don't know when, that may well be the case, but I don't know the details on that.
Okay, that's good. Due to your incomplete research. Willie James moved in August of 1977, and Izzy and Cheryl Knox live there.
Izzy Knox, well, how about that? Izzy Knox lives there. Isadora Knox was a former Dane County supervisor. I think had been county affirmative action. Martha, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's amazing. Even if you're just making it up. So the EOC is finally allowed to investigate the Bree Stevens incident to determine the cause and effects of the tension between the minority community and the police. 2 days before, now the president of the police union won't participate. Police Chief Wilbur Emery does his own investigation and clears all his men. Turns out they were not racist, and that he blames coverage of the incident for the racial tension. He says that it was just a blown up. It was just a little thing, and you blew and Reverend Wright, you blew it all up. And the problem is the public attention, not the underlying reality. And he denies all the allegations about brutality and he says, police chief says, because of the blowing up of this incident, I think there has been more damage in the last 6 weeks as far as black police relations are concerned than in the past few years. He is blaming Reverend Wright for acrimony between the minority and the police community, and he says that black agitators, the police chief is saying there are outside black agitators coming to Madison to cause trouble. They ask him for particulars, he doesn't volunteer any. Merritt Norville, who was at this time the community services director for the Madison Redevelopment Authority, has a different take, and this is a very important point that Merritt Norville, we'll talk about Merritt Norville a little bit later, but this is what Merritt Norville says in 1968. The tensions, it's not that blacks are more tense or more angry, quote, it's just that black people are now letting their feelings be known. The greatest problem in race relations in Madison is that, this is Merritt Norville, who's a black man. The greatest problem in race relations is that the majority of our citizens do not believe that racial bigotry and discrimination exist in Madison. The biggest problem in Madison racism is that white Madison doesn't believe that Madison is racist. And that is still something we hear today. And Merritt Norville was saying it 51 years ago.
Stu, one comment, one question.
Yeah.
The comment is Chief Emery always thought it was somebody else's fault. That was to the day he was out of office.
Yeah.
That was Chief Emery's, among his faults. Secondly, unmentioned in all of this is the fact that for multiple years, 64, 65, 66, 67, the country had had all kinds of urban riots that had greatly exacerbated tensions. I'm presuming that had some impact on Madison, but I wasn't here at the time, so I don't know.
It's crystallized in Dr. King's assassination. That's the predicate act. As opposed, I don't think, when Watts burned in 1965, I don't think Madison felt it.
Okay.
When Detroit burned, I don't think Madison felt it. When Dr. King was shot, Madison felt it. That's
interesting. Given what Watts and Detroit.
Yeah. I could go back and look. Certainly, civil rights is in the zeitgeist. Civil rights is one of the overwhelming imperatives of the age. But I don't know that any particular riot was felt in Madison at any particular time. Now, how else could this year end? After much work, the Urban League finally gets established and gets accredited as a red feather agency, which is a precursor for what the United Way does now. Nelson Cummings comes here from, I think it was Gary, Indiana, to be the first executive director, and he can't find a place to live. How perfect is that? That the head of the Urban League can't find can't find a 3-bedroom for himself and Marlene and their kids.
What? Are you serious?
Nelson, yeah.
I don't even know that. I'm sorry.
That's why we teach, Martha, for those. What? What did you just say?
He was just a nice man, my friend's dad.
Yeah, Nelson Cummings was the first